I don't think the Stoke fans will ever forget Arnautovic, Bojan, Muniesa, Afellay, that type of players. Everybody's going to be after a striker. So if you identify a striker, guarantee 15 other clubs have as well.
Yeah.
So then it goes down to what's your USP, what can you sell them, what can you give them that makes you stand out to everybody else. Communication is huge. You have to all be on the same page. Everybody needs to be aligned. We're always talking about the squad, how it's evolving, what's happening, injuries. There's different ways of looking at a deal to see whether it was a good deal or not. Initially, my task was to improve the first team, be able to bring players in, help the development, and low price, high, and sell for a high price. I don't think sporting directors are too far behind managers now in terms of being moved on. So you've got to bring success.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today's guest is Mark Cartwright. So Mark is the current sporting director at Championship Football Club Huddersfield Town, having spent time working in America and with Stoke City. So Mark's job is a very, very interesting one. So I've got lots of questions to ask him about what he gets up to on the average week. A lot of his time is centered around recruitment as well. So we actually go in detail in terms of from start to finish what a transfer will look like and who's involved in that process, etc. So that's very, very interesting. We also speak about the highs and lows, dealing with the pressure of the job. And Mark is very kind enough to give some sound advice for those looking to forge a solid career in sport. So quick reminder, if you aren't already subscribed to the channel, please do hit the subscribe button below to get more videos just like this. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Mark. Mark, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Chris. How are you?
I'm really good, and I'm very grateful to you for agreeing to do this. I know you're a busy man. We've managed to catch it on an international week, so hopefully this week's been a bit quieter for you.
I'd love to say yes, it has, but it has. You're in a very fast-moving and fluid industry, so I don't think you ever get the chance to go, do you know what, I can have a quiet couple of days.
Yeah.
There's always something happening.
Yeah, well, I can see you still in the office there, working hard, Mark. So for those that don't know who you are, Mark, I'd like to pass it over straight away. So just if you want to kind of give a quick intro on yourself and your current role and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Mark Cartwright. I'm currently the sporting director at Huddersfield Town. Started on July the 1st, so it's been a bit of a whirlwind. And it's basically everything that relates to the first team, to the academy, to the training ground is under my watch at the moment. So that can be anything from the kitchen to the nutrition, to the analysts, to the coach, the whole works. So it's a good chunk of work.
Nice. How's the kitchen looking, Mark? Is it any good?
Well, we've just got a new oven, so I'm hoping the
Right, so obviously I've got loads of questions on the back of your role and what you do day to day, your recruitment and all that, but what we'll do, Mark, is we'll just kind of go back in time. I don't know how good your memory is. You obviously doing a bit of research on you. You were a player, you're a goalkeeper. So if you want to just give a bit of an overview on the early days in terms of a player and how that kind of worked out for you.
No, for sure. Well, I like any kid at school, you want to be a footballer. I got approached by then, I think it was League Two York City, to be a schoolboy. I went through that whole schoolboy process, going up there in school holidays. Eventually got to the decision where do you get a scholarship? It was a YTS back in those days, and a pay packet. This was £27.50 for a week, and that got me. That was perfect. I could afford to live on that.
Yeah.
So I did that. Unfortunately, in the first year, I got hepatitis through food poisoning. So I was ill for 6 months. And then literally I came back into training on a Monday. The other goalkeeper had broken his finger. He was working in a pub and he dropped a barrel of beer on his finger and broke his pub because he was sort of covering for me part-time. So I literally had to play the first Saturday I was back from illness, and I got two-footed in a challenge and shredded my cruciate ligament.
Oh, dear.
I was then out for another long period of time. I was told I'd never play football again on my 17th birthday, and spent a long period of time having second opinions, and eventually took some advice, did something different, and went back incredibly fit. So I missed pretty much the first year of my scholarship.
Yeah.
Went back for the second year, did well enough, but not well enough to get a contract.
Yeah.
I was so in that period of time, I'd been invited by the PFA to go and do the trials to go on a scholarship to America. So I did all of that, not really understanding why I was doing it, but it just sounded good. So I did that.
Yeah.
And I was offered a scholarship. And at the end of the season, I'd been offered three scholarship. One was in Chicago, one was in Florida. So I was obviously swaying more towards Florida. And I had a conversation with a guy called Ricky Sprazier, who went on to manage Sunderland, Manchester United. He was my youth team coach and a really, really good coach and a good guy. And I said to him, "What do I do?" And he was basically very blunt and sort of said, "Go to America." So I took his advice, went over there, and I'm glad I did, because that made me grow up. That made me, become independent and not. So I spent nearly 4 years out there doing a university degree and playing the game over there with the university. And then I came back, took the gamble to go into Wrexham, went into Wrexham, did really well and got offered a contract, and then, sort of floated around the lower leagues for about 10 years from there.
Yeah, nice. So when I was doing a bit of research on you, Mark, I was on your Wikipedia page. How good your memory here? So I'm going to just read this. So it said, he was a bit part player at Wrexham until the 98-99 season, where he played 43 matches and produced a fine performance in a 0-0 draw at Man City. Do you remember that game, Mark?
Yeah, I do. That's one of the one games. I think it was. That's one of those games that's impossible to not remember.
Yeah,
it's probably the best game I've ever had. It was at Main Road in front of a full house. I had a lot of friends and family there in both ends of the stadium. And they just couldn't score past me. It was just one of those games where I just saved everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, that was a phenomenal day that you'll never sort of forget.
Nice. So you mentioned you kind of had a few different clubs and on league and kind of dotted around different areas. So then from there, I mean, you've done some coaching. You've been an agent as well. So at what point were you kind of planning your next move after playing? So did you know it was a conscious decision you needed to have something in place after, and how did that kind of work from player to coach to agent to where you are now, really?
No, not really. I think I sort of, it creeps up on you. Suddenly becoming 30, 31, 32 and being classed as old creeps up on you. I was never really sure whether coaching was for me. And if I did, it was only going to be for the goalkeepers. Yeah. But again, I'd started playing for fun at a place called Leek Town. And then I had my final knee operation, which was my 9th knee operation. And I went, that's it. I think I'm probably done now.
Yeah.
So the guy at the time said, well, you're a popular member of the group, come in and just help me out. So I helped him out, and eventually he left and I took over. So I had that sort of management experience there for a while. And at the same time doing that, I'd started on the pathway to becoming an agent. And that was purely because I think a lot of the people had seen that I'd been to university in America. Yeah. I'd always done my own contract. So a lot of players and people that I'd played with started coming to me for advice, or started to go down that route. So it wasn't really conscious decision. I think I just ended up falling into it. And through that, I started realizing that I'm more of a builder in those terms. So when I was getting a player in, it was trying to see where could they get to, how could I get them there, but also understanding that there was probably going to be a threshold for some of these people, and having to have those difficult conversations. So that's how I sort of fell into becoming an agent. I did that for a good chunk of time. Ended up working for a company called Besix, which were a law firm that had an agency attached. So it was very good, because it was, there was all the legal help you needed behind you. Yeah. It was also very ethically run, so there was none of the dodgy stuff that you hear about going on there. So you could always sleep at night. And that just helped me go to the sort of, I've gone from League One, League Two Championship to now dealing with Premier League players. Obviously Stoke City were on our doorstep. The law firm had did their paperwork and legal documents when needed. I know it's now gone to Bet365, but there was a close relationship there. And eventually, when Stoke got to the position where they wanted to try and open up the club to the world rather than just being an English-based club, they approached my boss and said, would I go in? And for me, it was a bit of it was a no-brainer. It's going back into the club environment, but it was going back into a stable Premier League club. So it was interesting. Good times.
So at that point, then you've obviously been heavily involved in the recruitment side, being the agent and all of that. But going into that role was it the sporting director role that you first initially went into at Stoke, then, Mark? So what areas did you have doubt in yourself in terms of there's probably stuff that entails that you've not done before? I know you've done a lot of the recruitment, but how did that kind of feel, and what were your thoughts on that, stepping into that role? Because it's a big role to step into.
So I went in as technical director, so different titles, similar things. And initially my task was to improve the first team, be able to bring players in, help the development, and low price, high, and sell for a high price, but also to fix the academy, to make sure that we were starting to develop players through there. So they were my two real main areas of focus to start off with. And then it sort of, it grew out from there over the 8 years that I was there. So initially I was brought in to do a very specific role, which was heavily based around recruitment for the first team, and then a little bit of restructuring and recruitment for the academy. And then eventually it sort of, it became bigger and bigger as the manager changed. So it was actually very good because, you could have gone into that role and really doubted yourself. But, I had great owners, I had a great chief exec, and they allowed me to grow.
Yeah.
So in many respects, they didn't expect me to come in and be the sporting director that I am today. Yeah. They gave me the opportunity they knew what I was good at, and that's what they needed at that time. And then they let me grow into the environment around me. So I think that was like the perfect start for me. So I didn't have to doubt myself because I knew I was good at what I was going in there to do.
Yeah.
And I worked very closely with the chief exec and very closely with the managers and the academy director and all the recruitment team to start off with. And then, like I say, that grew out a bit. So no, it was a good start to that particular role.
Yeah. When you joined, was Stoke in the Premiership when you joined, or they were?
Yeah. I think they were in the fourth year.
Right. Okay. So you're there sort of 2012, 2019, if that's right, according to your profile there. So obviously there was some good times at Stoke there. Obviously, I know it ended with the relegation in the end, but there was some good players you signed during that time as well for Stoke. So Shaqiri was probably one, Arnautovic. Some players that have had a huge impact at Stoke. So, what was some of the high points at Stoke for you? Like what kind of good memories have you got from that time?
Well, I think if you look at it purely from a footballing experience, signing the likes of Bojan, Afellay, all from Barcelona, and convincing that type of player to come to Stoke, as Stoke were transitioning away from a certain style of play under Tony Pulis to a different style of play under Mark Hughes, it was incredibly important and satisfying that, we were Stoke City. We were still having agents say, well, you play long ball, you take long. No, we don't. We want to play football. So to convince that level of player all the way through that this is how we want to do. And then to take a team that was finishing, probably a couple of places above relegation or whatever, and taking them into the top half and finishing ninth and a couple of points off Europe. There was there were some really good games, some really good performances. The players we brought in, I think at one point we got the nickname Stoke-alona because we had that many ex-Barcelona players. We had more Champions League winners at one point than Chelsea, and so we started building something really special. Those times were incredibly good.
And what do you put that down to, Mark, in terms of getting them big name players that, like you say, probably you had to convince them to come to Stoke, but also from the outside, people wouldn't have expected Stoke to sign them types of players. So was that down to just? I mean, what was it down to basically? How did you manage that, and what did that entail?
Well, it was down to telling them Stoke was in Manchester. No, no, we had you were going for a player that needed a home. So Bojan had been out on loan a lot. Marc Muniesa had been at Barcelona. They needed to feel important. They needed to feel that they had a home. Mark Hughes at the time was incredibly good at, because he was a good selling point, really, because he's a guy that's played for Barcelona.
Mm.
He's played for Bayern Munich. He's played for Man United, Chelsea. He's managed at in the top league for a long, long time. So you could say he knew what it took to be a top player, and he always used to have this saying that about leaving your mark on the game.
Mm.
And if a player signed for Manchester United or Manchester City, they're going in to keep the club at the level they're at. So you're just topping them up. Whereas if you came to Stoke and we did something like, finishing in the top half, or if we could get into Europe, then the fans at Stoke would remember you forever.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, what's happened. I don't think the Stoke fans will ever forget Arnautovic, Bojan, Muniesa, Afellay, that type of player. So it was all about leaving your mark on the game. Yes, you've been at big clubs and you've been sort of topping those clubs up.
Mm.
Come here and leave your mark on the game, and that's what they did. And that's what I think convinced the players to come to Stoke. That, and they could live in Manchester.
Yeah, definitely. So you went in there, you said as technical director. So technical director, the role itself has a lot of names: sporting director, director of football operations. Are they all the same, Mark? Kind of what's the, and also then what does that role entail? What are you actually responsible for in a bit more detail, if you can?
So I think the role will be different at every club.
Mm.
So there'll always be different. So if you look at Stoke, I didn't have any involvement in the medical side of things.
Yeah,
that was very well taken care of, and there was no need for any outside interference, so to speak. In some clubs, you won't do sports science; that will go straight to a manager or what. So each club will be slightly different, but there will always be the underlying key things that you do. So usually it's analysis, usually it's recruitment, it'll be hiring and whatnot of the head coach and everything that goes through it. So it just depends on the scope of what is at the club and what the owners are expecting you to do. So for example, here, I've got the entire training ground. Yeah. So that is, everything that touches the first team and the academy, you're overseeing. At Stoke, it was the academy, it was the first team in terms of recruitment and everything else, but not medical. So, and I know each club's different, so it just totally depends on what you're going into. So, for example, Norwich, Stuart Webber was there to be the face of it all. He was there to build it, but he was also there to be the spokesperson. I don't have to be the spokesperson here.
Yeah.
That's to the chief exec and Jake and to Kevin, the owner. I will quote when I need to be quoted, but they're the face, and of course the head coach is the face. So each club's different.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So then, if we can kind of based now on the role where you're at now, Huddersfield, Denmark. So what if you can give a kind of an insight into what an average week might look like, if there is an average week, and kind of how, if you are overseeing all of them different facets, whether it be analysis, recruitment, etc., how do you kind of split your time and dedicate so each of them are getting enough attention? Because there's obviously a lot going on, and you've only got so much time in the day.
Well, I used to break it down. I did used to break down how much time I spent with the chief exec, how much time I spent with the manager, with the recruitment team, with the academy. But in all honesty, you have to be, your diary fills up with meetings and phone calls for each department. And then obviously you've got agents in the outside world coming in. But I will always make sure that I will always sit down with the head coach or the manager, in this case, Darren, every single day, maybe twice a day, 3 times a day. And we're always talking about the squad, how it's evolving, what's happening, injuries. You've got the medical staff, who's injured today, what's going on. So we get a report constantly from the medical staff, so you're overseeing that. Analysis, you can sort of leave alone a little bit because they're working for the manager at the moment on the next game, and he's got that moving forward. Your opposition analysis will be coming in and working with them as well. So sometimes you can step away from that. At this point in the season, you've got January coming up. You've also got next summer where we're already starting to work towards that. So spend a lot of time with the head of recruitment when he's in, just going through positions, going through KPIs for each player. What are we looking at? What's out there? And then it's the work. And then you're taking that to the chief exec and saying, this is how much potentially it's going to cost. This is where we're looking. This is what we're trying to do now. There's going to be, 3 or 4 players coming in January. Then there's going to be 4 or 5 players coming in the summer. You're looking at budgets for the summer now. So we're trying to plan ahead. So everything is just constantly moving. And then, of course, it never runs smoothly. So jokingly aside, the oven goes. We've got to sort of authorize that. Get into the oven. There's been horrific rain, so how do we do, what we're going to do with the pitches? The groundsman's panicking a little bit, it's a little bit slippery. We don't want any injuries. So it's constantly evolving. So you've got to leave, whilst you've got all these meetings, you've also got to leave a chunk of time for everybody else, because everybody else's problems are going to come to you, and you're expected to solve it. So I spend a lot of time talking with the manager, the medical, the chief exec. We have regular calls with the owner, so it all bunches up. So I wouldn't say that there's what an average week looks like, because it will change. But it will always be busy. But you've always got to have that moment in time where you've got a couple of hours break where you can deal with other things, or I've not spoken to the kit man today. I need to speak to him. So you've just got to try and plan your time accordingly with levels of importance. Obviously, recruitment becomes more important now because of January coming up. Maybe something else can drop to the bottom. And then once the January window's out of the way, something will rise to the top, and you're working through that. But communication is huge. You have to all be on the same page. Everybody needs to be aligned. And there's a constant line of communication, like I say, with that sort of executive level, and then you can feed that down.
So you said there you obviously speak to Darren, the manager, every day, like maybe multiple times a day. So is the manager the closest kind of other person that you in terms of the person that you spend the most time with or speak to the most? Is that the manager, or would that be the chief exec, or is it kind of just a mix of both?
It's a mixture of both. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I have a very good and a very close relationship with the chief exec. So there's nothing off the table. Everything is there. He knows what I'm doing because I report to him, and I know what he's doing. It's the same with Darren. So I would say I'd probably spend more time with Darren on a day-to-day basis, face-to-face, than I do the chief exec, but I probably spend more time on the phone with the chief exec than I do with Darren. But they're both just as important.
So the chief exec there is, you said Jake, isn't it? And you worked with Jake in America, did you?
Jake Edwards, I actually played with Jake at Wrexham.
Played with him, okay.
So we've known each other for 25 years, which again is unique in this sort of industry. So, and then I worked with him in America at the USL when he was running the league there. So I know, he knows how I operate. I know how he operates. So it's very smooth in that respect. And we're both capable of having to make tough decisions, and we're both capable of having to have those hard conversations. But we've got the trust, which is the main thing in this game.
Yeah, definitely. So, and one thing you did mention there in terms of the things that you're overseeing, I'm just curious to ask about the kind of how the budgeting works, whether that falls under your remit, Mark, as a sporting director. So, for example, let's say the club is given X amount of money for their wage budget for the year. Is that budget down to, where does that budget come from in terms of, where does that number come from? Is that from the chief exec? Is that from the owner? And then is it up to you to kind of make sure that's well spent, divvied up correctly, and just in terms of how that works?
Yeah, so you got to sort of understand the dynamics of where Huddersfield's been in the past. This was a club that was going into administration, and Kevin Nagel, the owner, saved the club. This was going, it was going under. So being in no doubt about it, he saved the club. But because it was potentially going into administration, it was trying to be sold. A lot of things had been scaled back. Yeah. Understandably, because people are trying to sell it, etc., etc. So the finance department at the club had a very strong grip on the budgets, on the money, which department has what, and so on and so forth. So going into this year, the overall budget is under Jake. Everything that we have falls in line with Jake. Yeah. If we need something, I will go to Jake. People will come to me, I'll go to Jake and the accountants. And going forward, you would want each department to have their budget, to be able to control that. I'd have oversight over that. Jake would have full authority over everything. But then, like say, moving forward, it's a case of Jake and I worked closely together on what we thought the squad needed to be, what it needed to look like, where the wages need to be. Is there an increase? Is there a transfer budget? He then takes all of that and sits down with the accounting department and goes through everything. This is, in an ideal world, what we would look like. Jake would then take that to the owner, and the owner's chief financial officer, a guy called Michael, and they would go through it. So you're part of the process, but you're not all of the process. And that's absolutely fine by me. And then what will happen during the window is Jake and I will constantly be talking about what we got left. This guy's going out, this guy's coming in, so it's constantly working through it together, and overseeing it and making sure that Jake is making sure that I'm staying within the boundaries that have been set. I'm trying to stay within the boundaries that have been set. And at the same time, Jake is trying, and Kevin and Michael are trying to give us everything they can to get the best we can out of the squad. So budgets were already set before we came in. So this is sort of, we're now going through that process of what next year looks like. So it's all very interesting. Yeah. I'm not an accountant, so that's not my remit. But you have to have a handle on what is going on.
Yeah. Definitely. So, and you kind of said earlier, Mark, the kind of whole training ground is yours. So, is that where your office? Are you at the training ground now? Is that where the offices are? Yeah. So, and just curious to ask about the academy then as well, Mark, because again, in terms of the fan perspective, everything is on the first team. That's where the points are made, and where where people will ultimately judge you. And the academy is more of a longer process. You might implement things and they might not come to fruition for years to come. So what's your kind of involvement with the academy, and how important would you say that is to a club like Huddersfield?
So the academy was shut down many years ago, and they went into a B team model here. And look, Kevin is a very community based gentleman. So he's one of his first decisions was we're reopening the academy because it's for the good of the community, and we want to see development of our own players. And I'm absolutely all for that, as is Jake, as is Darren, because I think it's a huge thing for the community, for the club to have young players from around the area having that opportunity to get through, but it does take time. So going back to the Stoke days, we revamped the recruitment, we sort of restructured the academy, we changed the sort of culture within it because it wasn't producing what we needed, and it wasn't the people's fault. It was just wasn't the tools weren't there, and the talent wasn't there. So we've got a perfect opportunity now it's a blank piece of paper. We're starting again. But so for example, at Stoke, we recruited many really good young players Nathan Collins, Harry Suter, Tyrese Campbell, Josh Timon, and these are all players that club have sold for probably 30 to 40 million pounds.
Yeah.
That's a big chunk of cash.
Yeah.
And they've all played for the first team. So they've all come through the academy, got into that first team, and then they've gone on to bigger and better things. That's working. But it took 5 years. It took 5 years to get that cycle going. So it is very much a long-term plan, and it is very much putting pathways in place for talented young people to get through to that first team and not blocking them, not holding them back. We have a very good loans department here, so we can be very specific in terms of pathways for players. Once you get to a certain level, your journey now is very much mapped out.
Yeah.
You'll either hit the levels that we need, or you'll become a professional footballer, and maybe it's not here. Yeah. But on the flip side, it's also an academy is also about developing good human beings. And if they don't become a professional football, which is incredibly hard to do, we have to have exit strategies, whether that's scholarships in America, whether that's trying to get them into local companies or whatever it is. We've got to have those strategies, but it's also about families having a good experience, and it's also about us creating and helping to create good human beings that can go back into the community and do good things.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll talk about now, Mark, if that's all right. So in terms of the recruitment side of things, because I know that probably takes up a lot of your time. You say we're getting closer to January, but again, I'm sure you're not just planning for January in the type of role you've got to plan years ahead as well. So on that kind of recruitment side of things, I'm sure your time being an agent has obviously helped. You've kind of been involved in recruitment before you were even doing the role you're at now. So if you could just kind of give us a bit of an overview of what the department looks like in terms of just other people that's in there and what goes into bringing a player into a club, really.
So I think where it all starts is the knowledge of what's needed. So that is very much the sporting director and the manager.
Yeah.
And as I say, we're constantly reviewing the squad. We're constantly seeing who's doing well, who's stepping up, who's dropping off, what do we need. So you get to a point where you go, okay, we need X, Y, and Z. The manager then steps away from it, and the recruitment department step up. So you get the analysts trawling through the data, and the data points have got to be better than where we are now with the squad, and then that can be passed over to the live viewing, so we can start looking at the players, and then you're doing also delving into backgrounds, you're doing due diligence on character and everything. So a lot of hard work goes into that. You've got agents throwing names at you left, right, and centre. You will have a database of pretty much all the players in the world because, with modern technology, you can get eyes on anybody anywhere nowadays. So you will always have some form of a report on a player so that you can start from there. And eventually, it'll whittle itself down to where the head of recruitment has got several options for each position that you need.
Yeah.
And from there, it's then a case of, okay, well, we have head of recruitment, myself, the manager, have a meeting. We have the head analyst there as well to talk to the data aspects of it, and we will go through every single player that is on that list.
Yeah.
And from there, it's back to the manager, because this is the guy that is going to be working with these players on a daily basis. I don't.
Yeah.
I'll see them in the corridor, I'll see them in the canteen, but I'm not actually working every day with them, coaching them, telling them what to do, giving them the tactics, philosophies, etc., etc. So it has to be the manager's choice, from my opinion.
Yeah.
And then so we will then come up with a list of, if we're looking for, let's say, left winger, we've got 5 options. Right, Darren, put them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if you've got it absolutely spot on, he'll go, just sign any of them.
Yeah.
I mean, and then it's back to us to work through it and try and get it there. But at that point, the head of recruitment will have already spoken to the agent of the player. What's the deal going to look? He'll be the nice guy. What's it going to look like, etc., etc. Not negotiating, but just trying to dig up the facts, what it looks like. You're all doing your homework into the player's character, because everybody everybody's got a network in football, so we've got all that information, and then it's okay. Deal with the club, deal with the agent. Then the most important thing is player and manager have got to meet.
Yeah.
Because those two have got to look each other in the eye and try and say, I can work for this guy, I can work with this guy, I can trust this guy, and so on and so forth. So from start to finish, it can be, it can be very quick. You could go, but he's available. We all know him. We all know his character. We know the agent. Can we do it? But there are also situations where you can track a player. So Shaqiri, for example, we tried to get him when he left Bayern Munich to go to Inter, and there was no chance at that point. And he spent a year at Inter, and we followed him, and then at that point, Inter couldn't do the deal to take him in. So we chased him. We'd already tried to chase him again in January, so he knew he was wanted. So sometimes it can take a lot longer.
Yeah.
But you have you've got other clubs trying to convince them as well, trying to convince the agent. So it's then down to negotiating with everybody. So it's there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of different dynamics involved. Everybody's going to be after a striker. So if you identify a striker, guarantee 15 other clubs have as well. Yeah. So then it goes down to what's your USP? What can you sell them? What can you give them that makes you stand out to everybody else? So you have to have all of these different things. So it's a long process, but hopefully you get to the end where you actually get the signature of the player.
Yeah, I mean, because I did a little bit going back. Well, I spoke to you before we started recording. But part of my role as a recruiter, I did a bit of recruitment analysis back in the day. So kind of a lot of them things that you said there resonate, and kind of did a lot of them myself. But I think well, you mentioned there some can come around quicker than others because just for example, like a club could sign a fullback and then who was the first choice fullback then becomes available out of the blue, and then that could be someone that you want to then sign. So just kind of being reactive as well as also being forward thinking and planning years ahead, because I suppose you've got to then factor in the contract lengths of the current players, the people that are maybe in the under 18s that you don't want to block their pathway as well. So there's lots to kind of consider when you kind of get down to it. So you touched upon agents a little bit there, Mark. Is that more of a thing that the head of recruitment would deal with? Are you dealing with agents on a daily basis, or do you have them conversations as well, or is it more the recruitment guy?
So I think agents will try and find any way they can into the club, and it's making sure. So, for example, if an agent sends me a player, I'll send it straight to the head of recruitment because that's his remit, that's his job. But I've got to have relationships with agents because I'm going to be sat down negotiating with them.
Yeah,
Darren, again, is getting agents ringing him, putting players into him. He again passes them on to the head of the recruitment. But Darren has to have relationships with agents because it's their players that he's coaching and developing and hopefully making better. So, we all have different roles and responsibilities with agents, but all three of us and all the scouts as well will have agents that they speak to. So, everybody is having conversations all the time. But I guess the sort of key element of it is when it gets down to that final negotiation, that's me.
Yeah.
So that's where, it doesn't matter how friendly you've been with that agent through this whole process. That's the business end, and it can be tough.
Yeah.
But you're both doing a job, and at the end of it, you shake hands. Hopefully everybody's happy and you can go back to the friendliness of it all again.
Yeah.
So you got to be prepared for that. And sometimes it's better, to keep others out of that. And I used to say to my players as an agent is, look, I'll fall out with the club. Don't you fall out with the club because that damages your career.
Yeah.
If I fall out with the club, yes, they may be annoyed with me for a moment in time, but the moment I have another player that they want, we're friends again. Do you know what I mean? So it's that type of thing. So and I need your head of recruitment and I need my head coach to be the good guys. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. If we can do a little bit of an example for the fans listening as well, and just kind of the outsiders. So let's say you've done that process of you're looking for a player, the recruitment team's done their work, the analysts have done that, you've presented to Darren, you've then narrowed down on the one guy that you want. So then what happens there from that in terms of that? Is it then speaking to the agent first, and then from there, how does that? You mentioned you're kind of the negotiate. You would do some of the negotiating. So how does it look from first phone call to that player's agent potentially to getting him to sign on the contract? What's that kind of flow look like, Mark? If you can share some of that.
Well, don't forget the agent will have been involved all the way from the beginning.
Yeah.
9 times out of the 10, the agent is ringing you and saying, Billy's available for loan, or Billy's going to be available for transfer, or he's a free agent in the summer. So he's been involved from day one.
Yeah.
If there's a club involved, then you need to speak to the club. Then you need to get permission to speak to the player. So in reality, you're always dealing with the agent.
Yeah.
The sort of player comes at the very end, and the club comes in the middle of all that. Sometimes the agent has already got the permission of the club, and he shows you that, and you can literally, sit down with the player. But it's very much a agent, club, player type model. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's times when people meet players before they've spoken to the club, because it's also very hard not to. You could do a heck of a lot of work and then get to the club and they go, no, he's not available. Yeah. So you've got to make sure that they are in that respect. So I'm not sure I've answered the question perfectly there, but it's
no. It was just kind of the flow really. So a lot of it is obviously done via the agent and through that they're the kind of the sounding board and the go between the clubs and the players really. So would then, let's say the club that you're buying the player from or getting the player from is agreed, you have that conversation. Is it the first time you will typically, when will you meet the player, or when will the manager meet the player? Because obviously then you've got to agree personal terms as well. Is that done before, done after? Just kind of the order of things.
It's all sort of ongoing. The manager shouldn't meet the player until you've got the green light from his club. Normally, the moment you start negotiating and it's serious, the selling club knows it's serious and the buying club knows it's serious. They'll give you the ability to speak to the player.
Yeah.
Then it's down to the manager and the player to talk football, because it could fall apart then. If you've got a left winger and the manager says to him, yeah, I'm going to play you on the right, or I'm going to play you in midfield, he's going, no. So it could fall down at that point. Yeah. So that's where that is. So that meeting will be going ahead whilst the two clubs are pretending, if we given the authorization, whilst you're sorting that out. Terms, again, the sort of terms will have been known from the start. So the agent will sort of say, look, he's looking for 10 grand a week, or he's looking for 15, 20, 50, whatever it is. So you sort of know where the ballpark figure is.
Yeah.
You'll have also done your homework to understand where he might be now. And where does he fit into your squad? So what are you prepared to do? So you got the manager's stuff going on one side, you got the club, and then you got 3 conversations going on to get the one deal done at the end. And usually the player and the agent will also be having a separate conversation about, are they happy with the offer? Do they want to go there? And so on and so forth. So it's quite complex. It's not as easy as, FIFA, where you just go, like that player, make a bid, and sign him, and he's in the team. So it is quite complex.
Yeah, sound. So, and again, going back to I know we're jumping around a bit, but you mentioned some of the good players that you had a part of at Stoke. Is there any deal that sticks out to you, Mark, that you think maybe you're more proud of, or you just it was a great deal to do out of all the ones that you've done, kind of up to date, really?
There's different ones. Look, there's bad ones I can remember, sure. Which I won't name names, but there's good ones, and there's good ones for different reasons. So, for example, Nathan Collins and Harry Souttar, they were good ones because they were good young players that came in at 16, that got into the first team, and they were sold. So that showed that pathway worked.
Yeah.
There are other good ones we didn't, Afellay, Bojan, Munies are on a free, from Barcelona. They were good deals because of the level of play that you were getting and how they took your squad to a whole new level ability-wise. And then you got your Arnautovic's, where you're sort of signing them for $2.5 million and you're selling them for 25 million, or your Jeff Camerons that you're signing for 2.5 million, and they're playing, nearly 200 games for you. So there's different ways of looking at a deal to see whether it was a good deal or not. So there's quite a few there that you can look back on and be proud of, but you've also got to look back and go, what didn't work? You've also got to understand your mistakes. Why didn't it work? What did I do wrong? And so that in your next job or in the next role, you can take that with you. So you've also got to be self-critiquing and not just looking at the good times. You've also got to look at the bad times.
Yeah, that's a good point. That leads on nicely, actually. So we all know about the good times. It can be incredible to work in sport, but then obviously it comes with, there's down times, there's bad times. As mentioned, we touched a little bit on the relegation. So just on that, Mark, kind of how do you deal with that? Because again, it can be a ruthless industry to work in. Maybe your position not as bad as obviously a manager, because they can get sacked so much easier, but you've got a lot of pressure from the fans, the media. So just dealing with kind of tough times really, and how that can feel when you're in that club environment, and let's say you've lost 6 on the bounce, 7 on the bounce, and it's looking very bleak, and you're getting that pressure. How do you kind of deal with that?
I think you've got to try not to listen to the outside noise. Because you'll have all the people on social media, calling for you to be, for your head and, public stoning or whatever it is that they want. You've got to stay strong in your conviction, strong in the fact that if there's a plan in place, okay, well, you've got to look at it. Why is it working? Are we just having a blip?
Yeah.
Is this going to come good again? Or is this something where we need to make a change? And I don't think sporting directors are too far behind managers now in terms of being moved on. So you've got to bring success in some respects, but also when there are bad times, there can be bad times because everything that could go wrong is going wrong, and sometimes you can't do anything about it. But it's also when things are going badly, certainly at a football club, they can rapidly go badly. And there's times when you can try and stop the rot, and it's nigh on impossible because everything around it is going wrong as well. So at that point, it's okay. Accept what's happening, accept the inevitable, and start planning for what comes next. So again, there was a point at Stoke where it looked like we could be going down. So we had 2 plans. We had a plan if we stayed up, and we had a plan if we went down. Eventually, this plan sort of disappeared, and we were right. We are going down. Okay, now how do we change this? How do we stop the losing culture? Because losing can become a habit just as much as winning. So how do we stop that going into next season? How do we be a Premier League team playing in the Championship to get back to the Premier League? And so you start to put things like that in place, but that can be derailed as well.
I mean, about the losing culture, I'm a Sunderland fan. I know all about that. We went down and down, and then we just kind of stayed in League One for way too long. But hopefully, we're on the way back, Mark. But no, that's interesting. I mean, in terms of then the role and the good points, then let's go back to that. So, what do you enjoy the most about the role of the sporting director, Mark? What gets you up in the morning? What are you loving about the job?
Well, I love building. I think if you're in this role, you need to be a builder, somebody that can look at the academy. Okay, how do we do that? How do we get the pathways for players? How do we get the best squad we've got? So you're a builder, you're a problem solver. I love the passion. I love the passion of the fans, the games, the whole atmosphere around football. And you're dealing with different dynamics every single day. No one day is the same. And I think that's a real joy. I think you've got to also be comfortable in negotiation situations. You've got to be comfortable having hard conversations. You've got to be a planner. You've got to be methodical. All these things I think are the parts, and you've got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe that what you're doing is right. But you've also got to be able to look at it and go, actually, is it working? And if it's not working, you've got to change it. You've got to be a problem solver again. So I think that the passion, the fluidity of every single day being different, the games, the building, they're the bits that get you up every morning and go into work for.
Yeah, nice. So one thing I do always ask the guests on the channel, Mark, is just for a bit of advice. So you've obviously had a decent career up until now, and that's obviously not nowhere near ending at this point. So if you were to give some advice to someone that's just wanting to work in sport, but also then just that wants to kind of get into a similar role like yourself, because like just from my background in analysis, there's a few different analysts that have stepped up to that kind of role, and you're starting to see more of that. So yeah, just kind of how you would advise someone to kind of develop their skills, but also then maybe step into a role similar to yourself in the future.
Well, I think, like you say, the key points there would develop your skills. So understand your strengths, understand your weaknesses, and work on your weaknesses whilst maintaining your strengths. So that's a key part of it. And then you've got to network. You've got to meet people within the game, meet people outside the game. There are many different courses now that you can do, whether it's GIS, Global Institute of Sport, whether it's the FA, level 3, 4, 5. There's various different routes you can do. Some universities do sports degrees now. So if you're first starting out, give yourself the best footing. So if you want to get into sport, and you can go to a university, because they will help get you internships and they'll help you get involved in the clubs. If you're already in the sport, it's okay. Well, what course now betters me?
Yeah.
What course is also going to introduce me to a different group of peers or different group of executives? Because you're always going to have to impress somebody. And then it's also having the ability to sell yourself, having the ability to tell people what it is you can bring, what it is you're good at, and how you can help them. So I think it's a bunch of that. And then there's also an element of luck. There's also an element of being in the right place at the right time, and not giving up. Don't give up. I was told I'd never play football again, and I had a 10-year career, even though some people said, I still wasn't really playing football, but I still did it. So don't ever give up. Fight for whatever it is you want, and just learn from everything. Every experience is a learning curve.
Yeah. Well, you did say it there, because we speak about this a lot on the channel, Mark, in terms of networking. And as you will know, in sport, it is a case of everyone does know everyone. I think you've got to lean on your network a lot, especially in probably recruitment. I'm sure you've got a little black book of contacts you've made in America, all over, in terms of that. So what would you, how would you say, like, what's the, what we're trying to say? So the importance of networking really, and how that can help you progress in your career.
Oh, it's massive. I'm under no illusion that one of the reasons I went into Stoke was because I had a network of people in Europe, in the rest of the world, both at club level, both at agent level. Yeah. And I worked hard to build that network up. And it's cold calling sometimes. It's ringing somebody you don't know and introducing yourself. And like we said before, you're selling yourself.
Yeah,
this is how I think we can help. This is what I can do. And then they'll introduce you to somebody else, and then all of a sudden that grows. But you've got to work at it. It's not going to come to you. It's not going to land on your plate. It's up to you to go out and start building that network.
Yeah. And in terms of then, have you had anyone that you would say is a bit of a role model to you, Mark? Something you've learned a lot from over the time that you've been working in these various roles?
So I was as a gentleman called Mike Rigg, who used to be at Manchester. So Mike actually started out at Wrexham. So I knew Mike when he was there, when I was a player. And Mike has had a great career. And he was probably one of the first people that I could go to and ask for advice. And then I was very lucky. On top of that, we then did, I did the FA courses when Dan Ashworth was there. Mike Rigg was also working for the FA then. And they were trying to rebuild the FA with the England DNA and all the courses. So again, I met some incredibly gifted and experienced, Dan Ashworth, Nick Hammond, Mike Rigg, Kevin Thelwell, all these people were there. So, and I think what had been a very closed environment for sporting directors suddenly opened up, and everybody was all right, if I'm negotiating with Nick or Mike, then we're both working for different things, but
Mm.
we're all going through similar issues, all had similar problems. And I think so that little group there was vitally important for me to be able to pick up the phone to somebody who's in the job and say what's happening. But again, underneath that, I had some great people that worked for me. Kevin Cruikshank, Tom, Lee Mabry, Pete Whiteley. They all were good people, and I think it is about surrounding yourself with good people as
Yeah.
well.
Nice, perfect. Well, that's all the questions I had, Mark. So listen, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything you want to give a shout out to before we wrap it up? Anything you want to say?
No, I mean one of the things you spoke about was there any reading material out there?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. I do. I don't know how I forgot that. Yeah, I normally do ask any books, any podcasts that you would recommend, Mark. Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
there's I think there's straight off the top of my head. There's an article by it's a white paper by McKinsey and Company, and it's called The Value Pitch.
Yeah,
I think for anybody that is trying to understand and get into this role, that is a great paper to read because it talks about building value in the team and how you do that. So I think that's good. And I know in Eastwood, his book Belonging is always a good read.
yeah.
You're talking about culture because in this role you are talking about culture. You are looking at the story and what you can do and how you can portray the club. So they're probably two key things that I would take away.
Perfect. I'll link both of them below. If anyone's got any questions, leave some comments below. But Mark, I hope you have a good season. All the best for the rest of this. Apart from not your next game, the one after you playing Sunderland, so I hope you lose that one. But have a great season. Thanks again for your time, and yeah, hopefully catch you soon.
No worries. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers, Mark.